once a body focused repetitive behavior, typically once you get it, it is lifelong. And what ends up happening is if you don't get help for it, does start to transition into something else and into another body focused repetitive behavior, which is what happened to me. So when I was around 15, went into Trichotillomania, which was the hair pulling. And typically with that, it kind of ebbs and it flows.
Welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. I'm your host, Kendra Rinaldi. This is a space to explore the full spectrum of grief, from the kind that comes with death to the kind that shows up in life's many transitions. Through stories and conversations, we remind each other that we're not alone. Your journey matters, and here we're figuring it out together. Let's dive right in to today's episode. Let's start with a quick disclaimer. This podcast includes personal stories and perspectives on topics like grief, health, and mental wellness. The views expressed by guests are their own and may reflect individual experiences that are not meant as medical advice. As the host, I hold space for diverse voices, but that does not mean I endorse every viewpoint shared. Please listen with care and take what resonates with you. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I am chatting with Kisha Reynolds. She's a certified clinical hypnotherapist. She's a certified hair loss specialist and a life coach based in Philadelphia. She is a leading advocate for body-focused repetitive behaviors. First time I'm ever hearing that, so I'm really interested in learning more. And I know it's something that's misunderstood and minimized and very hidden in silence. So we will really be learning more about that. So welcome, Kisha.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on and sharing about what you do and also how you got to where you are. So let's start off sharing a little bit about you. Where did you grow up and where do you live now?
I'm out of Philadelphia now, but I grew up in New Jersey, small town called Ewing Township, which is about right out of Trenton, New Jersey. And pretty much my story as to how I got to be here really started when I was a child. I went through a phase of just, some severe bullying. A lot of kids have gone through that. And, but for me, when it came to the bullying, that really sparked my first body focused repetitive behavior, which was more so very pervasive nail biting. And back during those days, which we're talking very early 80s, nobody knew anything about it. In fact, the term body focused repetitive behavior had not even been coined yet. That didn't come along until the mid 90s. So at that point, it's just more so looked at as, okay, well, you know what? You need to stop biting your nails, I'd say, and that it's a bad habit. But it was more than actually a bad habit. Once a body focused repetitive behavior, typically once you get it, it is lifelong. Okay. And what ends up happening is if you don't kind of get help for it, does start to transition into something else and into another body focused repetitive behavior, which is what happened to me. So from there, when I was around 15, went into Trichotillomania, which was the hair pulling. And typically with that, it kind of ebbs and it flows. But at the time, again, I remember going to my mom, taking me to different dermatologists, to get an idea, try to figure out what it was. And they had never heard of it. It was very, very new at that point. And so they thought that it was, alopecia. So the way that this works is it's really based on sensory. So sometimes it is looked at as a relative of like OCD, and to a certain extent it is. But it's different in the sense that typically when someone has OCD and they are performing rituals, is usually something where they feel that they don't want to get sick. okay? Or they may wash their hands several times because they don't want to get germs. They don't want to, they want to get sick. This is quite different. It's a sensory based. So it's not based on that. It can go and come anytime. So it can happen because you feel bored. It can happen because it's triggered because of a very stressful, event, anxiety. It's toxic, but it's a calming ritual. I tend to also equate it with also kind of like the same feelings as, an addiction, if you will, because the urges are very strong. And typically, when you start to pull, I have pulled sometimes where I've pulled maybe a dime size, spot, on in my head because I'm pulling the hair. What seems to also spark the pulling for me happens to be any type of a pimple or blemish or anything that I get on my skin. For the average person, it may not bother them, but for someone who has a body focused, repetitive behavior, when the moment that I feel something rough or feel something, it triggers me to start bothering with my scalp. Okay. And then in turn, after that, then going into the pulling ritual to help me to feel better. Okay. So that's how it happens essentially. Now, I went in and out of remission. So like I said, this doesn't it is lifelong, but you may not be pulling, all your life. There are times that I've gone in and out of in remission, and times when I've stopped for a year, and then all of a sudden something will happen, and I will start to pull again. Usually because I've gotten a pimple, and I've start bothering with my scalp, and then in turn bothering pulling the hair out of and around that area that is inflamed on my scalp. And I've been doing this for about a good 35, 36 years. And it got to the point where I wanted to stop. I needed to stop. I had to stop. I also learned at that point about trichotillomania. It was good to be able to put a name with what I actually had. I wasn't, because before I didn't exactly know what I had. And the term was coined by Christina Pearson, who was the founder of TLC Foundation for Body Focused Repetitive Behaviors in the mid 90s. That organization has since, it was a nonprofit, and that has since kind of closed down, but they now has paved the way for other nonprofit organizations to pop up and to come up and to be able to educate. So with that, I found hypnotherapy. I have always had a love for mental health and, being able to help others. And for me, it happened to be like hypnotherapy. I put together a program, and now what I do is I use hypnotherapy to be able to help clients. Now, one of the things that I do absolutely also encourage, and I work, hypnotherapists work well, hypnotherapy works well by itself, but where it really also shines many times if you are working along with a licensed clinical mental health professional. Because what happens is I work from the subconscious space. Okay. And as the traditional therapist works more from the waking state of the conscious space. So the two of us together can really do like a two-prong approach in really being able to tackle this. So that's ultimately what I like to see happen with my clients. I've never been one that's subscribed to that has to be us or them in terms of myself. It works better when you have basically a team, like a holistic approach to this. Okay. It is something that it does come, it will come back, which is why having that team is very, very important, which is also why educating people about this is so very, very important as well. That's why I was so thankful for the TLC Foundation. I was in 2024, I was able to have the honor of being able to speak on their diversity panel and talk about what that looks like in different spaces. Okay. some cultures, okay, and I will speak specifically for the African American culture, we are, I'll say probably within the past 20, 25 years, are just really being very honest and vocal about mental health, okay, to a certain extent anyway. So something in terms of with hair pulling, it may not be deemed as important as, okay, somebody who has, say, for example, a cancer or like a heart problem or something like that. So many times it doesn't get the same attention. But the thing of it is that it can be very debilitating. Okay. Especially, I have worked with clients who will not go out of the house. Okay. Because they have pulled their hair and don't want to wear a wig, or may not necessarily have the money in order to get a hair unit. Okay. That looks believable. That also affects your personal life. So that means, okay, if you are married or you have a significant other or a partner, you shy away from intimacy sometimes because you don't want, your partner to know that. I personally myself went through that at the time. I'm not now, but at the time I was in a relationship, and that was something that I kept secret. It wasn't until I started kind of writing a book about this that I then came out about it, and started to talk more about it, because I felt that in talking about it, that for me, that removed the shame. It also showed me that there's community. Okay. I did not know at the time that there were so many people that were out there that were going through the same thing that I was going through. So, like I said, the TLC Foundation at the time was huge for me, because that was the first foundation that I found that really spoke to people who were like me and experiencing the same things that I was experiencing. If it was not trichotillomania or the hair pulling, it might have been, skin picking. It might have been the lip biting. Some people, they will bite the inside of their jaw. Okay, or they'll chew on the lip, or pick to pull the skin. Some people, they will have it where maybe they pull hair even out of from their eyebrows, from the hair on their arms, even into like the pubic area. Okay. And some people with it, they also not only will they pull, but they will sometimes maybe eat the hair or eat the root at the end, of the hair follicle. So I'm getting in front of this has been, a mission for me, that I am dedicated doing. Currently now, I'm a member of a nonprofit organization called the Lighter Foundation, which was started by Bianca Lighter out of Harlem, New York area. And she really is doing a phenomenal job in kind of putting this, out there to gather people to be able to come. Actually, we had a really beautiful time actually on Sunday, because I am one of the ones that I lead the support for the foundation. And this support group goes on every fourth Sunday, okay, of the month, okay, at 4 p.m. And we were actually there just sitting and talking. And there weren't that many people at the time, because this was our first support group kind of coming back from a hiatus. But even with the few people that we did have, it was amazing to be able to just kind of connect and share similar stories, and be able to even share different tips and things like that that people have maybe found to be helpful. So,
Thank you.
yes, sorry,
Yeah,
this is rambling.
it's okay, Keisha. I know I could see that you're really passionate about the
Yes.
topic, and I am learning something new because I always associate, the nail biting and the hair pulling to the feeling more of like anxiety when people do that. But it
Hmm.
doesn't, it's not necessarily only an outward expression of anxiety. You mentioned being bored or something else that also can create it. What
Yes.
yeah, so is and it brings comfort to the person that is doing it when they're doing it, the emotions inside, like,
Hmm.
kind of chemicals are being released that it kind of creates this addiction to some extent, right, of the body.
Right. So we're talking about all of that, that dopamine, all of that makes you feel, good. That's all, that's what's being released, okay, in the brain, which, is, which makes you feel good. And then it's also, addictive, you want to continue that. And so, and if you find yourself, and again, this is something that is done in secret. Okay. The interesting thing is that I've noticed when I'm not in my secret place, which for me, okay, is my bedroom. Okay. Well, when I'm not in my room, I don't do it, and I guess because at that point I'm out, more so in the open. But yes, it releases, dopamine in the brain and that chemical. And then that, you kind of continuously you chase it because you feel good. It feels good. It's hard to explain, exactly what it feels like. I'm trying to think of a way to be able to explain it to somebody who has never gone through it or has never experienced any type of an addiction. The only thing I can explain it to is, have you ever been in a situation where you haven't had water for a really, really long time and your mouth is dry and you just crave water, and it doesn't matter what you drink, you are craving water. So take that like times 10.
Mhm.
And that's what it
That's what
feels
it is.
like.
Now,
Yeah.
it's because I've been a nail biter in my life as a kid. There were certain behaviors that I might have had, like as you were saying, like the lip biting. I'm like, wait, I do bite my inside of my lip. I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's it. But like now, I'm trying to think of which ones of the things that I even do might be even
Mhm.
repetitive behaviors. Something that I know I do, I rub my nose often, but for me, it starts because I have like allergies, so a lot of times I rub
Okay.
my nose. But then I'm like, I noticed my sister does it too. And I'm like, wait, do we both have, or do we have like this tick? I call it more like,
Mhm.
ticks or behaviors that just kind of become part of a personality, but that I never have sat down to think if they are associated with things like
With
this of
this.
relate with this. Yeah. So this is bringing that awareness even to myself and my own behavior. So thank you for pointing that out. The part that I wonder is how, because in your case, like you're aware of it, and so you now, when you do go through stages of then having the repetitive behaviors, you do it in private. But how many people that do, or like percentage wise, actually don't even know that they're doing it? How many of the behaviors are actually even subconscious? Does that make sense what I'm
It
saying? That they
does,
don't even know.
yes.
Yeah.
I can't give you an actual percentage, but what I can tell you is that it's a mixed bag.
Hmm.
For majority of us, it's a mixed bag. So what happens is you may automatically just start to do this. Okay. But you are aware that you're doing it. You may start to do that. Okay. So for me, and for a majority of the people that have this, it's not completely that you're doing it all like like you're just not unconscious, you're just doing it. Okay.
Yeah, she was touching
Um,
her hair, by the way, for because since we don't have video here on the podcast, like you're tucking the back of your head that you don't even know
yeah,
that you might be, or
right.
twirling of our hair, or things
Yeah,
like that we don't even
yeah.
realize. Hmm.
Yeah, right. You may not realize, because it's a habit, but well, see, the body focused repetitive behavior, what happens is it's more so, and sometimes they consider, some people have called it in terms of self-harm. So it's not, it's so that's where the pulling, okay, almost like the realistic,
Ritualistic,
realistic.
ritual,
Yeah, that's it.
ritualistic,
That's it. That,
ritualistic.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That. So, but it's almost in terms of like, it's not self-harm, but it's done to yourself. Okay. So the skin picking, which can actually be quite serious and very, very dangerous, actually. If you have a scab and you're continuously picking, and that can become infected. You can get all types of germs in there from your fingernails and just consistently just picking it. So it's that type of thing. So like with just rubbing your nose, I don't necessarily would consider that to be a body focused repetitive behavior.
Okay.
However, I mean, I
It could
don't
be a tick.
really,
It could be a tick. Yeah. It could
it
be
could
like,
be,
yeah, it
yeah,
should be,
it
it's
could
more
be
like a different thing. Hmm.
right. And like you said, okay, you have allergies. So for you, it's like, okay, I have allergies. Right. But typically the main ones that you see are, the hair pulling, happens to be also, like I said, the biting of the inside of the cheek, the lip biting. You will see sometimes people, like I said, the scab picking, those are your main ones, skin picking. Those are the main ones, that you will see.
Yeah. And when
And then
nails are, and then the not just it's the nail biting that it goes all the way down to the skin, or even just the
yes,
skin
yes. So
around the nails. Yeah.
for an example, and I'm just going to show this because I feel that, I have to be very honest. So for example, I have gone myself to, because again, it still comes back, and I've gone myself to where I won't bite any other nails, but I will bite my pinky. So if you can see that I've like bitten
I see. Yeah.
my left
Yeah.
pinky, like down really, really far. So that's, kind of what I'm talking about, to the point of, sometimes a person may not have like any nails, on, like almost just about no nail, just like that pinky that just saw. And,
Now,
yeah,
let me ask you, because you said this is something somebody will live with. And
yeah,
even with you having done hypnotherapy on yourself, you yourself being a hypnotherapist
yeah,
as well, and helping people in this, what is then the mechanism? Is like you want to create more space in between these episodes? Is that the
yes.
goal of then therapy?
Right. Yes. So when I'm doing this, okay, because like I said, it doesn't completely go away, but with hypnotherapy, what it does do is it helps to take that urge down. Okay. So for example, if it's at, if your picking is at an all time like 8 or 9, I can significantly reduce it, in a sense of I can take that down to, maybe something like a 2. Okay. Or like a 1. Okay. I never promise complete and total release of it, because it, it does come back, and that is the nature of the disorder. But what I can do is significantly reduce it. Okay, reduce the urge of you having to pick. And such I've had to do it myself. One of the things I do is self hypnosis, and that's also what I teach. My clients. I work with them one on one, but I also teach them towards like the last like 3 episodes, or sessions that I have with them. I will teach them self hypnosis. Okay. So that then they also have something to go back to. Okay. Because while I enjoy seeing my clients, I want to equip them to be able to help themselves. I don't want it, them to feel like they always have to come to me, unless of course it's something new, then absolutely, because hypnotherapy is good for a number of things, it's just that helping to significantly reduce the urges to pull with a BFRB happens to be one of them.
I would equate it just by what you're describing. It seems like it could be equated to somebody that, for example, was an addict, like an alcoholic, that they still call themselves that even if
Yes.
they've never drank. So
Yes.
technically, there can be people, there can be people that maybe never end up doing the action again, but the urge might still be there
Yes.
within them, but they
Yes.
actually stop doing the action, even if the urge is there.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. And
Good. That
yep.
makes sense. Okay.
Yes. And you'll
Awesome.
find it common also sometimes with people, they have ADHD. Okay. You will find that this is very common. And many times it's like, like the comorbidity will go, like they will do that together. They will have ADHD, but they will also do that as well. Because the ADHD, you have that anxiety that is there. Okay. And then many times that does cross over into a bifocus repetitive behavior. Also from a, just looking at it from a genetic or a biological, the pathology of this, many times is also common. Like if you have, a parent that maybe was OCD, okay, or, somebody, a lot like high inside that be past something that you would be predisposed to, as well. I believe while my mom has never been diagnosed with it, just her ritualistic ways and growing up, I definitely believe that my mom was OCD. And, that was probably a contributing factor along with, it was kind of like, I guess if you were a perfect storm, the bullying, okay. And then on top of that, My mom also, having this, me not knowing what OCD was at that time. I was only 6, but it kind of put me in a position where it was almost like in a perfect storm to be able to develop this.
Because it gives you some control over something you didn't have control
Exactly.
over as well. So
Exactly.
there is an element of control that your
Right. And
mind is
soothing.
silent and soothing, that is kind of silently kind of wanting
Yes.
to have. Okay,
Right.
thank you. This has been very educational, a lot with this process. So so aside from body repetitive, I'm gonna have to go read it because
I know
it's a
it's
mouthful for me.
a mouthful.
Body repetitive behaviors.
Hmm.
Who else can benefit from, like, what other kind of clients do you have? And do they all have to be in person? I know you do retreats as well. So can you
I
talk
do. I
about
do.
the types of things you offer?
Yes, sure. So majority of my clients, in fact, all of my clients, except for maybe 2 of them, have all been virtual. So this is something that I'm able to do this from anywhere. I, just, use Zoom. And if that's not available, if someone doesn't, then we do it over FaceTime. What I do is I usually will explain to the person what hypnosis is. Many people don't know. They go by what they've seen in television. And basically, what hypnosis is a narrow state of focus, which allows me as the hypnotherapist to bypass, the critical mind to be able to then make changes in the subconscious, therefore being able to change negative thought patterns into positive ones. Okay. So, when we start talking about the critical mind is basically a filter. So if you think about, if you can, and, visualize or imagine a round circle, the very bottom of that circle is the primitive mind. Okay. And it's where you have your fight, fight, and freeze. That's where you have that's stored there. Okay. And right above there, if you think about in terms of a larger circle above that, that would be your subconscious mind, which is made of about 88% of your mind. Okay. Now, right up above there is a thin, it's like a filter, and that's your critical mind. And above the critical mind is your waking state, which is where we are now, which is responsible for being to analyze things, logic, reasoning, making decisions, that type of thing. And that's made up of 12% of your mind. So your subconscious is made up much more than what your waking state is. So what happens is within your subconscious, as we get older, especially starting around 8 years old, we start to then be able to develop our own programming. Okay. And with that being taking in negative self talk about ourselves, or taking in negative talk and sometimes positive talk from the outside. Okay. Social media, all of that, kind of coming in. So an example of this is, what happens is then it creates what we call known association. Now, from a therapeutic, from a mental health, in terms of a licensed clinical therapist standpoint, that would be a distortion. Okay. We call them a known association. So a known association is what you have pretty much grown up to believe about yourself and what you have taken to believe about yourself. For example, if you feel and have known for many, many years that you make the best chocolate cake in the world, okay. So then if someone were to tell you, hey, Kendra, you don't make the best chocolate cake and you've always felt that you did, and you know that you did, you've won prizes, best chocolate cake, ribbons and everything. That's not something that you're going to accept. In fact, it would not even permeate through to your subconscious, because that critical mind will filter that out. Same thing with that is that the critical mind does not discern whether something is positive or negative. Its sole purpose and sole goal is to protect what is within that subconscious. So the same thing plays out if you feel that you are not enough. Okay. You've grown up feeling that way. Then someone from the outside says, no, that's not true, but you are enough. And even though you may hear it, you don't receive it. Okay. And that's because you have a known association that you have grown up with and that you have internalized that you are not enough. Okay. So what happens is that is a distorted way of thinking about things. So what happens is a clinical licensed clinical therapist will work with it and kind of get you to understand that that is a distorted way of you of thinking about things. Okay. What I do from my end is that I completely take the critical mind offline to get a period. So with hypnosis, the critical mind is offline. So when I'm speaking directly to your subconscious. Okay. And that's also the reason why sometimes therapy sometimes tends to change things a little bit quicker than with the traditional therapy, because with traditional therapy, you're really fighting with with that critical mind, and getting them to realize, no, that is a distorted way of looking at things, and it takes time. Where we kind of do a little bit of, I guess, if you will, a shortcut, and we kind of bypass that waking state and go directly into and via the subconscious.
Wonderful. Yes, it's important to see like the different ways and to know that there are different ways to be able to address a
Yes,
situation. And
yes.
like you said earlier, that holistic approach, having it kind of come in through the different
Oh, it's
views, it's always
crucial.
going to be it's always going to be more productive for the end
It's
result.
And Kendra, it's important also too, because one of the things that I'm acutely aware of is my scope of practice. Okay. So I don't cross into doing diagnosing. That's not what my role is. I don't diagnose. Now, if you have a diagnosis, okay, I will then help with that. Okay. From doing mindfulness, things of that sort, using hypnosis, and even, in NLP. Okay. But I
Neuro
do not,
linguistic programming.
yes, programming, yes, but I don't diagnose. Okay. So that is why that two-prong approach works marvelously. There are certain things that I am unable to work with. I'm not able to work with someone who is schizophrenic. Okay. And just because they are already kind of like in this duality in terms of this fantastical way of thinking at times, and to put someone into hypnosis and tell them to do this imagery and all of that, that would maybe trigger or make things worse. So for that reason, I'm unable to work with someone who is schizophrenic. Okay. I do work with people who are bipolar, but I will not work with anyone who's bipolar unless they are being treated by a licensed clinical therapist, and that they are medicated, and that they're on a baseline. Okay, they're not in a phase of hypomania. Okay, so I will work with that, but again, like I said, I'm very aware of my scope. Another one that I will not work with by myself is BDP, or borderline personality disorder. Okay, which can be very tough anyway. Okay, but again, that's something that, dialectical behavioral therapy is, one that is specifically good for that. But I will not attempt to do that by myself. That is something that I would look to partner with a licensed clinical therapist to be able to work and with that.
Kisha, as we wrap up, I want to ask you, do you work with people too that are grieving
Yes.
and in their grief?
Oh,
Okay.
yes. That
Because
is a big one.
since this is the topic of my
Yes.
podcast,
Yes.
for somebody that's also in the, because a lot of these things can show up also
Yes.
more when you are in grief. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of my certifications that I specialize in, is grief and recovery. Okay. So with that, many times we do it, it's actually quite beautiful. I had one client I helped them be able to move through that. There's 9 stages of grief. Okay. And sometimes people get stuck, and, they're not able to move forward. So I help with that. I remember there was one client who actually was really, I mean, just kept kind of going back and forth, and really wasn't really able to move forward. So what we did was, and I think what it was is because as much as she was grieving, she was also angry because she was married and her husband also had an affair. So that was also very difficult to, you're grieving the death, but also
but you're
knowing
angry at the person that died. Yeah. You're also angry at
exactly.
the person. Yeah. So there was a
E-
layered,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. It
Well,
was
thanks,
very
Keisha.
layered with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kisha, for people to get a hold of you, I'll make sure to add your website on the show notes. It's
Yes.
321 Sleep. Is that correct?
It's
Deep Sleep.
www.321deepsleep.com.
Deep
Yes.
Sleep. Yes. Deep
Yes.
Sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thank you
Yes.
so much again, Kisha, for sharing and
Absolutely.
for educating us on hypnotherapy, as well as I'm not going to try to say the
Body
Tilo,
focused
but
repetitive
but
behaviors
I won't try
or
to. I won't even try to say the hair pulling one because it like
is
Tilo.
right.
Yeah, it's
People
a
just say hair pulling or
hair
just
pulling.
trichotillomania, but people just say
Trichotillomania. Hair pulling. Yes.
trichotillomania, but people just say
Trichotillomania.
philomania.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
hair pulling is fine.
Okay.
Hair pulling is fine.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you once again, Kisha.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Kendra. I've had an amazing time. Thank you.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.